Well, let me welcome everybody to this panel in which you're going to learn exactly what the Obama administration is going to be doing over the next 4 years. We have a group of experts who will tell you exactly what the administration is planning, and you can bank on it, on all its specificity. Let me just say, briefly to start out, I think all of us in this room know that at this moment we are living in a part of history. For my generation, there have been a lot of critical moments, but I think this moment is unique, both in terms of the substance as well as the cultural significance of what is going on. First, obviously, we have a watershed election in which we have elected the first African-American president of the United States. It's hard to overstate the significance of that. It's simply because there's so many other things going on at the same moment that I think you haven't seen the full, in a sense, description of how revolutionary this really is. Obviously, we're facing a number of problems: the economy, a fiscal crisis, a question of what to do with the economy, an upheaval, as well as specific questions on the agenda of a bailout. We sort of forget that there were international crises going on at the same time, Iraq, as well as Afghanistan. It was just 2 or 3 short months ago that President-elect Obama selected a vice president, presumably because of the importance of international affairs. What a difference 3 months make. And then finally, obviously, an election that itself was extraordinary. 52% of the electorate came out for the Democratic candidate. That's a larger Democratic majority since Lyndon Johnson. The Democrats now have taken firm control of both houses of Congress, and clearly there was more energy expended in this election, more money spent than anything we've ever seen. But the question, of course, is what's the mandate? And that's a little less clear. President-elect Obama ran one way, as most politicians, smart politicians do, in the primaries, has moved to the center, and then events have in some sense taken hold so that nobody really is quite sure of exactly what he's going to do. And also I should mention that the level of support, while exceptional, is not truly a landslide, and Dean Jamieson will be speaking about that, I'm sure, in much greater detail and thoughtfulness than I can. But in fact, the participation rates were not over the top, not critical election levels. So the question everyone needs to address is, what is Obama's mandate? What does he have running room to do? In 2 years, there will be another election for the House of Representatives, and people will looking back retrospectively. So the panel, which will consider issues such as the economy, foreign affairs, healthcare, tax policy, and energy, includes, starting out immediately to my left, Professor Kathleen Hall Jamieson, the Elizabeth Packard Professor and former Dean of the Annenberg School. She is Director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center. She is a prolific author in a number of 15 books and articles. She's also one of the most cited academics in the country today. I spend every Friday night with Kathleen Jamieson watching her on Bill Moyers telling us what's going to happen.
You didn't have to add that last part. It was sounding good.
Bob didn't know about that. And then after Kathleen, Charles Mooney, the Heimbold Professor of Law, will tell us how to solve all these fiscal problems. How's that for pressure? Chuck is an internationally recognized expert on both commercial law and a topic we're thinking about today, bankruptcy issues. He's written the leading case book in commercial law. After Chuck, we will be hearing from Professor Wendell Pritchett, who is an expert on urban affairs issues. He's published 2 books, one that we celebrated yesterday on urban affairs. He's both a prolific academic as well as a policy wonk. He's just finished a term as Director of Policy for the Mayor. He's also been a senior advisor to President-elect Obama and chaired his urban affairs task force. We will then also hear from Professor Seth Kreimer, the Gemmill Professor of Law. Kreimer is an expert, one of the country's leading experts on civil liberties issues, especially as they play out with new technologies. He's also litigated a number of cases, and I suspect might be involved in past cases involving the Bush administration and maybe even future cases involving the Obama administration. And then finally, we will be hearing from Professor Tobias Wolff, who is a constitutional law expert, really written quite incisively on First Amendment issues. Tobias is chair of the LGBT task force for President Obama, as well as a senior legal advisor to President-elect Obama. So as you can see, we have a number of people who have not only insight into the issues that will be facing the administration, but also in many cases, the people who will be making those decisions. So in any event, let me turn it over to Kathleen Jamieson.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the question, what is the campaign forecast of governance, and answer it by beginning to play a clip. If the person behind the screen could play Joe the plumber.
Now, my old buddy Joe the plumber's out there. Now, Joe, Senator Obama's plan, if you're a small business and you're able, and the guy that sells to you will not have a capital gains tax increase, which Senator Obama wants. If you're out there, my friend, and you've got employees and you've got kids, if you don't adopt the health care plan that Senator Obama mandates, he's going to fine you. Now, Senator Obama, I'd still like to know what that fine's going to be. And I don't think that Joe right now wants to pay a fine when he is seeing such difficult times in America's economy.
And I'm happy to talk to you, Joe, too, if you're out there. Here's your fine, $0. You won't pay a fine because as I said in our last debate, and I'll repeat, John, I exempt small businesses from the requirement for large businesses that can afford to provide health care to their employees. I exempt small businesses from having to pay into a kitty. But large businesses that can afford it, we've got a choice. Either they provide health insurance to their employees, or somebody has to. Right now what happens is those employees get dumped into either the Medicaid system, which taxpayers pick up, or they're going to the emergency room for uncompensated care, which everybody picks up in their
Interesting exchange in which John McCain looks genuinely bewildered by the answer. He's bewildered by the answer because he was expecting to hear that Joe the plumber was going to be fined under the mandate in the Obama plan, and he'd missed the fact that Obama had never defined what a small business is. And as a result, no one has a clue about how many workers constitute a small business, what size of company constitutes a small business, whether having a cafeteria constitutes a small business, or whether Joe the plumber and his what prospective employees would constitute a small business. The first point I would like to make about the campaign of Barack Obama is that Barack Obama campaigned in a way that suggested specificity while maintaining the ambiguity that creates the capacity to do much of what he'd like once he governs. And that's a sign of a successful campaign. John McCain thought he knew the answer to a question that Barack Obama had never actually answered. I run factcheck.org. We spent part of the fall year trying to get the Obama campaign to answer the question, what constitutes a small business? And as a result, at what point does the fine and the mandate actually kick in? And we got Furman on the record once saying under 10 perhaps would be exempted, but we couldn't get the campaign to go on the record with that. We don't know what President Obama is actually going to do in many areas, except that he's created a sense of priorities about them, and that means his capacity to govern in creative ways is wide open. And, second point, some of the areas in which he offered the highest and clearest specificity are the least reliable forecasts that he gave. With real tenacity, he insisted that he was going to raise taxes on households making over $250,000. He made that statement even in the face of repeated questioning in debates about what he would change in light of current financial circumstances. Now, that may be a ruthless consistency. It may be an adherence to a kind of principle. It may have been an awareness that if he changed the answer at all, he was vulnerable to Republican attack. However, I don't believe that he is going to increase taxes on those couples making more than $250,000 immediately because we are in a deep recession. So the thing that the public did reliably learn about him is something that I don't think is actually going to forecast governance. But who's going to penalize someone for saying they're not going to raise taxes after saying they were going to raise taxes? A sign of a successful politician. He's told some of us we're going to have to sacrifice, and then perhaps, at least in the short term, we won't. I'd like to make one more point. I think what Senator Obama did do in the campaign was telegraph a series of priorities. He was asked in one of the debates what he would do in what order. And he's being asked essentially for a priority list. And the list consists of health care, entitlement reform, and energy. He drops entitlement reform from his answer and goes to energy, health care reform, and education as his priorities. I think we have a clear sense that those are central to the agenda of this administration. And what we're going to see is a presidency that's going to be creative in finding ways in economic crisis to implement them.
Kathleen, thank you.
7 minutes.
I should mention, Kathleen, I said 7 minutes. She said it will not be shorter than 6 minutes, 45 seconds, and more than 7 minutes and 15 seconds, and I clocked it. You were right in between. I can see why Bill Moyers has you back and back.
I'm counting on the dean to get the hook from me. So my topic is financial reform in the election, and I thought I knew what the final version of the content would be by Sunday afternoon, but Sunday evening I got a press release from the SDIC that the 21st and 22nd banks had failed this year. Monday I awoke to find out that the government's going to invest $20 billion in equity in Citigroup and guarantee $300 billion of its loans. I woke up this morning to find out there's a $600 billion plan to buy mortgage-related securities. So it's a bit of a moving target, and I'll conclude in a few minutes by saying a few things about the auto industry and suggestions that it should be rescued in some way. I think there's a consensus that the world's economies are in a danger zone, and I don't just mean decreasing values, normal cyclical recession issues. I mean the very financial systems are in danger, and we're really in the midst of systemic risk in a big way. What might we see from the Obama administration? Well, one approach would be to address some core problems directly, bad investments in the financial sector, as well as excess leverage. The subprime crisis is a perfect example, but trying to regulate wise investments and leverage is a very tricky and difficult thing. Another would be to try to enhance the transparency in the financial markets. A perfect example is the credit default swaps. Private transactions that don't appear to the public in any conventional means of disclosure. There's a movement right now, regulators are on the verge of approving clearinghouses, so we would have a central counterparty for these transactions and could radically reduce risk through netting. And I think that will probably be done before the new administration shows up. Perhaps the most important thing is what we've been seeing on a very piecemeal basis, and that's providing needed liquidity and capital to the markets. For example, March and May 2008, Bear Stearns government guarantee of loans in a sale to J.P. Morgan Chase. September 2008, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, government takeover essentially, and putting $600 billion in. Also September, Merrill Lynch, sale to Bank of America with federal officials' encouragement. September, Lehman Brothers holding company files for Chapter 11, broker-dealer is under SIPC administration liquidation. This is the exception. It was not bailed out, but our basic legal infrastructure, and that is to say UCC Article 8 and the Treasury regulations for government securities and our clearing and settlement systems in the securities market, held up very well, and they managed to close out a lot of transactions with no serious problems. That is not the case in Europe, which does not have the needed infrastructure, and there are real problems in the UK administrative proceedings. AIG, Washington Mutual, Wachovia, the so-called $700 billion bailout. There have been substantial equity investments in banks, but then Paulson finally said, well, he's not going to buy troubled assets after all. That was devastating to the confidence in Citigroup. Its equity shrunk enormously. And and so did its ability to borrow. Fed's loaning up to $900 billion to banks short term. It announced it would purchase CDs and commercial paper, money market instruments, basically the first really significant involvement in Fed lending to private non-bank entities since the Great Depression. And I already mentioned the more recent announcements. What else might the administration do? Well, we've heard a lot of talk of some relief for defaulting residential mortgage obligors, but to really reduce the debt of the underwater transactions to the value of the property constitutionally would take bankruptcy, and I'm presently working on a theory of how we could reduce those mortgages in bankruptcy under a new chapter, but without interfering with the debtor's other assets and debts. I think we will see an extension beyond 2009 of unlimited deposit insurance for banks that want it, and maybe it will become permanent. I'm pretty sure we'll see some regulation of hedge funds, as Treasury Secretary Paulson has called for. And finally, the big three automakers. This may be the best solution for the automakers in Detroit and all around the world, actually, may have already been lost. And that's because people like Carl Levin and Pat Buchanan have repeated a mantra day after day that nobody's going to buy a car from a bankrupt company. Well, I guess if you convince people that that's a serious danger, they won't. But immediately upon General Motors, for example, filing for Chapter 11, they're going to be in a lot better financial health. No more payments on unsecured, on interest payments on unsecured debt, for example. An automatic stay. I think the government probably would need to provide financing because I don't think the private credit markets are up to the task, but I think with government assistance, Chapter 11 would certainly be the reasonable way out. That's what it's made for. And finally, I think the economy we're sort of poised at the top of a ski slope. Look for major defaults on non-subprime mortgages, residential, major defaults in commercial real estate. This will be good for some lawyers if they're still in business. It will be bad for others, but I would suggest that you keep your knees bent and mind your center of gravity.
Just one quick question, Chuck. And how do you come out on what they should do in Detroit?
Well, I think the industry has two problems. One is economic distress. They're not making products people want as much. And the economy's bad, so people that want the products are not able to get the credit to buy them. And they've got financial distress. That is to say, they have to deal with the creditors and employees and the like. Chapter 11 is not going to make a better product, but if they can come up with a plan, it would allow that to happen. Again, if the well is not already poisoned by creating such consumer concerns.
So you're advocating
Chapter
11. Go into Chapter 11, but a government-supported Chapter 11.
Yes, not unlike 20 years ago with Chrysler. I think chances are one of those major insolvencies, they have to have credit because you have to pay your lawyers and you have to operate the business. So it's expensive to go broke, and they will need some financing. And I would hope the government would step up. But I think Chapter 11 is the way to go. But of course,
that's a policy recommendation. What do you think will happen?
I think if they don't get the government direct investment they want, that one or more of them will take Chapter 11, even though the executives will lose out and they give money to Carl Levin and he says nobody will buy a car from a bankrupt. But if they file for Chapter 11, my guess is he'll buy the first one.
Thank you, Chuck. Wendell.
So I was asked to talk about what an Obama administration might mean for cities. And like a good academic, what I'm going to do is change the question to talk about something that I want to talk about. So what...
You've just seen the problem in being a dean.
What I want to talk about just briefly is it's a variant of the same question, which is that what role will urban areas play in an Obama administration? And I think that it's relevant to change the question a little bit. So, and I will get back to the question about cities. So Senator Obama was criticized when he was Senator Obama for not having an urban policy. And Mike mentioned that I was the chair, at least in 2007. I had to give up that job when I started working for the mayor of the campaign's urban policy task force. And so I can say categorically it wasn't true that he didn't have an urban policy. You can find it on the website, or at least getting back to Kathleen's point, you could find it on the website until about a week ago when they took down all the policy papers. But if you had looked before, and my urban policy class has all the policy papers, so if you want to go talk to them, they have it. And you're smart people, you can find the policy papers. Some of them are back up. I don't think the urban policy one is. Anyway, if you looked at the urban policy one, you would find the following things. Support for the community development block grant program, expansion of early education, initiatives in community-based youth engagement, major infrastructure investment, increasing job training programs, investment in startup businesses, assistance for families facing home foreclosure, an increase in the minimum wage and the earned incomes tax credit. It's a very long policy paper which has lots of ideas. So there were lots of policies. Many of them have been tried during the Clinton administration, and I would argue were successful, and then have been ignored for the past 8 years, and there are things that we should go back to. Others of them are new, particularly focusing on technology and innovation and sustainability, which Kathleen mentioned is a real priority of the administration. And in general, what do I think we're going to see? I think we're going to see increases for most of those policies. I come at this as a somewhat optimistic view. One, because I think cities and urban areas have a comparative advantage that I'll talk about in a minute, but also because most of these policies are stimulus policies. They're things that stimulate the economy, that are good for the economy in general. So I think that even despite the significant financial problems we have, we're going to see increases in the Community Development Block Grant Program, which provides lots of benefits to cities like Philadelphia and lots of other things, right? But at the same time, it is true that the senator didn't talk a lot during the campaign about an urban policy, and that's actually what I want to focus on just for a couple of minutes. He didn't focus on what he was going to do for cities or even urban areas, and I think it's insightful about the campaign. This would have been contrary to the senator's philosophical approach. He didn't want to position it as urban versus suburbs or urban versus rural, right? The point of the whole campaign was that these are all issues that we struggle with together, and he's not going to play to constituencies. So what he did talk about instead was what is his domestic priorities, and Kathleen already mentioned them. They got to be energy and sustainability, healthcare, and education, right? And what he did talk about was that the ways in which those policies will help urban areas and cities, right? So that was one reason why he didn't talk about an urban policy. The second reason, and this is something that I dwell on a lot in class, is that it's kind of silly to talk about an urban policy. Whatever Sarah Palin, I know you shouldn't kick a dead horse, but whatever Governor Palin had to say is we are an urban nation. We all live in urban areas. So any policy that you have, any domestic policy, and any international policy that you have has an urban aspect to it. So the idea of talking about urban policy is really kind of superfluous at this point. In that vein, what are other things I think are going to happen? The big questions for the administration, I think there are three in the area of urban affairs. One, how to make sure that metropolitan, that's the preferred term now, metropolitan areas get the appropriate share of resources. Even though we are a metropolitan nation, the way that the government is structured is still slanted towards rural areas, right? And so one of the things that the administration is going to have to focus on is how to make sure that the resources get devoted in the right way. And an early test next year is going to be fascinating, I think, is going to be the first infrastructure and then the transportation bills, because those are some big ticket items. And figuring out how that money is allocated is going to be really crucial. And so that's one that I'm going to be following. A second thing is how to make sure that the federal government's policies are coordinated. So in the past, government agencies have operated as silos. You have the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy, Department of Housing and Urban Development, and they do their own thing, often at cross purposes, right? So to rectify this problem, the president, the senator at the time, proposed a White House Office of Urban Affairs to get these departments to work together. This didn't get a lot of attention during the campaign, but it certainly got a lot of attention in the last few weeks. I've gotten lots of emails from people who want to be on this in this office. I think it's going to have all of 3 people, and I've already gotten 50 emails. But I think this is going to be an interesting office. The idea is that this is a person who's going to report to the president, who will have the authority of the administration to make agencies work together. A difficult thing to do, but going to be really crucial. I'm going to take a risk of going a little bit over my time by just telling a little inside baseball story. The dean just mentioned I finished a book. It's a biography of Robert Weaver, who was the first HUD secretary. And when HUD was created in 1966, there were a lot of people who were opposed to creating a new bureaucracy. And so Lyndon Johnson had the votes, so they were going to do it. But a bunch of conservative Republicans said, instead of having a new department, we should have a White House Office of Urban Affairs. And the interesting tidbit of that is that the leader of that movement was a young congressman from Illinois named Donald Rumsfeld. So when we raised this idea with the campaign last year, we didn't tell them that it was originally Donald Rumsfeld's idea, because I don't think they would have taken it on. So finally, the third task I think of the new administration is going to be to help cities, and I'm going to actually answer part of the question, exploit their comparative advantage. The reality is that we have cities that are troubled and lots of problems. Cities really do have a comparative advantage. We're back down to under $2 gas, but we will be back at $4 gas. Cities have a comparative advantage in that vein because of their density, their role in technological innovation and other things. We are here at the most important urban institution in the Delaware Valley, right? Penn is the largest employer. It is an inherently city institution. It's not moving anywhere, right? So by supporting innovation and research and things like that that the administration has committed to for places like Penn, the administration will be helping cities. So I think over the next 4 to 8 years, what we're going to see is a lot of policies that are focused on domestic issues that are actually going to help cities take advantage of their comparative advantage. So, while I'm certainly somewhat skeptical, pessimistic like Chuck about the economy over the next few years, I'm relatively optimistic about this administration and its ability to really make some significant progress in our urban areas.
Thank you, Wendell. I think you answered exactly what your question was. So, Professor Kreimer.
Okay, I'm here in my capacity as card-carrying member of the ACLU. And as civil libertarian, the election of Barack Obama is a good news, bad news story. The good news is the contrast between the administration of President George W. Bush and the statements of President-elect Barack Obama. President Bush presided over an administration which, as Jack Goldsmith said of his time as Office of Legal Counsel head, was an administration in which officials, and here I quote, blew through laws they didn't like in secret based on flimsy legal opinions they closely guarded so no one else could question them. As a paradigm, that is not one that appeals to civil libertarians. The language that the Bush administration used, they repeatedly assured us that American forces avoided torture, acted humanely, obeyed the law in actions towards captured suspects. At the same time that the lawyers who set the governing policy contrived legal analyses that constructed an insulated universe of legal meaning. Acting humanely involves hypothermia and stress positions. Waterboarding is not torture, and no action can be unlawful because, in the view of the administration, anything the president commands as commander-in-chief is, by definition, lawful. Vice President Cheney's counsel, David Addington, is quoted as saying, we're going to push and push and push until some larger force makes us stop. November 4th seems to be that larger force. And that's something that makes me, as a civil libertarian, happy. Indeed, the current indications are that President Obama is committed to changing the nature of governance in regards to the crucial issues that the Bush administration pushed and pushed and pushed on. 2 weeks after the election, November 16th, President-elect Obama was asked on 60 Minutes whether he would take early action to close the prison camp at Guantanamo and change interrogation methods. His answer read as follows: yes, a good beginning. I have said repeatedly I intend to close Guantanamo. I will follow through on that. I've said repeatedly America doesn't torture. I'm going to make sure we don't torture. These are part and parcel of an effort to regain America's moral stature in the world. That's the good news. The bad news is that the challenge of regaining America's moral stature will not end with the revocation of the policies that sanction, specific policies that sanction abuse of prisoners. The legacy of the Bush-Cheney administration faces Obama's administration with a series of difficulties. First, we don't really know all that has been done. The first task is a thorough investigation of the sorts of covert initiatives that have been undertaken, the sorts of secret legal memoranda that have been constructed, and the sorts of activities that will need to be redressed. The Obama administration will need to choose whether to have investigations undertaken in-house by inspectors general, by special prosecutors, by congressional committees, by separate commissions, or by a combination of those. Second, the Obama administration is going to be faced with the following problem. The Bush administration has left behind a series of prisoners who've been incarcerated between 6 and 8 years. It's unlikely at this point they bear the United States goodwill. On the other hand, it appears that most of them are not guilty of any legitimate legal offense, and many others can't be proven guilty without the use of evidence that has been tainted by the brutal way in which the evidence was obtained. The Obama administration will need to address what to do with these prisoners. Mike will ask me what they should do. I don't know. My view would be we need to seek to regain our moral stature in the world, which will entail some costs. 8 years imprisonment is at hard times a pretty fair sentence in most of the world for most heinous crimes. My view would be we should do the right thing and surprise some people and gratify the rest. Third, simply saying we won't commit war crimes in the future only goes so far towards regaining America's moral stature. Repudiation of wrongs is dramatically accomplished by punishing wrongdoers. And allowing wrongdoers to walk away without shame does little to reward the many officials who refuse to become complicit at substantial cost to their careers. Nonetheless, it seems likely that efforts to criminally prosecute perpetrators in the prior administration will alienate political support that will be critical in dealing with the looming and urgent problems that other people have talked about. A dilemma. I don't have the answer, but that's the dilemma that the Obama administration is left with. Finally, the Bush administration has built a surveillance infrastructure that includes watch lists, do not fly lists, financial reporting, the evisceration of FISA, wiretapping, extraordinary authorities under the Patriot Act, and on, as well as a series of capabilities I suppose we don't know about yet. With a law enforcement and homeland security apparatus that's become used to deploying these authorities, it will be a real challenge to force the bureaucracy back into more conventional and law-abiding formats. Eric Holder, the new Attorney General, is said to be progressive, but he has been a hard-nosed prosecutor. He is not a card-carrying member of the ACLU. There is at least some suggestion that John Brennan, who was active in CIA activities under Bush, is in the inner circle of the Obama administration. That also doesn't bode well. And of course, even paranoids have real enemies. The more activist an administration becomes in regulating in any sphere, whether it's healthcare, whether it's financial transactions, whether it's health and epidemiology, the more favorable consideration will be given to opportunities to gather information. One of the more striking initiatives that I've encountered recently is Google Flu Trends, by which Google seeks to map the outbreaks of influenza by tracking flu-related queries and making that available to public health authorities. That helps public health. As a civil libertarian, I wonder about when they start tracking inquiries about STD, inquiries about abortion, so on and so forth. As troves of data continue to grow, it will be more and more difficult for any administration to pass up the opportunity to put them to use in the pursuit of its own goals. So, good news, a commitment to regaining America's moral stature. Bad news, the need for oversight by ACLU and our allies won't be going away.
Thank you, Seth. I have to say my prediction that you had been suing the Bush administration and might be suing the Obama administration seems to be possible in light of all this. In any event, Tobias Wolff?
Thank you. I pulled a similar academics trick, which is that I basically didn't tell Dean Fitz what I was planning on talking about until the very last minute, so that he couldn't box me in with any public pronouncements. And what I'd like to spend my time talking about is the role of the American people in having some influence on what the Obama administration will do and what Congress will do during the Obama administration with respect to issues that they care about, and particularly with respect to what are often called constituency issues, issues affecting women, issues affecting LGBT Americans, issues affecting people of color, and so forth. And the basic message that I have is a message that you have probably heard in some form or another from the president-elect himself, which is that successful government and real change happen only as a consequence of movement from the grassroots and leadership from the top being willing to respond to movement from the grassroots. And you have heard Barack Obama say many times, and I have heard him say more than a few times, that it is of course the case, I shouldn't say of course, but it is certainly the case that he has a strong commitment to a set of core values that you heard him talk about during the course of the campaign, relating to equal rights and equal opportunity, relating to addressing not just the legal forms of inequality that continue to affect the lives of, for example, an estimated 12 or so million LGBT Americans, but also practical forms of inequality, like the failure of businesses to pay women equally for equal amounts of work, or racial profiling practices, which have an impact upon the equal status of people of color. And having elected a president who is going to address those issues in a serious way and who is open to making them a part of his priority list is a phenomenal moment for all of us. But it's not going to happen by itself. And the election of Barack Obama is the creation of an opportunity for change in these issues that are going to require sustained effort by people like you and people who work in organizations and who work in community-based organizations or advocacy organizations that help to define what the priorities should be for achieving women's equality, for achieving LGBT equality, and then help to push both Congress and the administration to, in fact, make those things happen. I sat in, I remember, for me, this insight is most sort of crystallized in one moment. I sat in on an endorsement meeting with then candidate and Senator Barack Obama for an LGBT organization in New Hampshire. And Senator Obama, now President-elect Obama, is phenomenal on LGBT issues. He has a very long history from his first years in public office of taking very courageous public stands on LGBT equality. And getting real results. And Illinois' laws are much better because he was there, and he did things in this presidential campaign which were unprecedented in raising the visibility of LGBT equality as an issue. But of course, he is not able to satisfy all people, as no one would be. And in this endorsement meeting, some of the members of this board were pushing the senator on issues where they hadn't arrived at the same position. And what he said to them very clearly was, look, it is not my job to tell you what your priorities should be in defining the areas of equality that you want to make progress on. That's your job. And what I can promise you is an administration that will be open to being pushed and that shares with you a core set of goals and a core set of values. But you're the ones who need to define your own interests and who need to do the work of placing those interests squarely on the legislative agenda and squarely on my agenda. And what I promise you is that I will be responsive to that pushing. And we are entering a time when, first of all, the advocacy community, I think, is at a real sort of defining moment in their own institutional and cultural history. Advocates have been in sort of damage control mode, in sort of a holding pattern at best for the past 8 years. And both the Bush administration for the last 8 years and Congress for much longer than that have not been very hospitable places when it comes to trying to make real progress on issues of women's equality, on issues of reproductive freedom and choice, on issues of LGBT equality. And organizations have had to really sort of huddle a little bit and just try very hard to define a modest set of priorities for at least not losing any more ground than is necessary. Now suddenly there's this moment of liberation when it seems like the shackles have been sort of removed, and there's the real possibility of making progress legislatively, making progress within the administration. And I think that what the advocacy community very much needs to do is not get lazy, because we are in a moment in time, first of all, when these large Democratic majorities in Congress do not translate to a sort of uniformity of views about sometimes controversial issues of reproductive choice. I mean, we have a wonderful Democratic senator in Pennsylvania who doesn't share the views of reproductive choice that our president-elect has. LGBT equality is something that does not have anything like uniform endorsement within the Democratic caucus of the Congress. And we're at a moment in time when there will be voices sort of asking for progress on equality issues to be put on hold, right? We've got an economic crisis. We've got financial systems which are in collapse and so forth. And there is nothing inconsistent with making real sacrifices on the financial front and also making progress on issues of equality. Indeed, there's been enormous important work done demonstrating that safeguarding equality is, generally speaking, very good for business and very good for the economic health of communities and of families and of industries. But nonetheless, there are going to be voices out there from all sides of the political spectrum who are going to push against making equality for women, for LGBT communities, for people of color a priority. And it is the advocacy communities and the people who are going to need to make sure to keep the pressure on to keep those issues on the agenda and to make the case that Congress needs to make time to address these issues, and that the policy shop of the Obama White House needs to make time to address these issues. So my fundamental sort of insight here, for what it is worth, is that the election of Barack Obama creates an extraordinary opportunity for real change on these issues. Barack Obama really is the man that you think he is in his core commitments to equality, to dignity, and to equal opportunity for all members of the American community. And it is up to us to take advantage of the opportunity that his election presents. Thanks.
Tobias, thank you. I think you hear a common story here, which is an incredible moment, incredible opportunity, but quite a bit of ambiguity about exactly what the electoral mandate is, and more precisely what President Obama is likely to do. But it's clear that given what's facing the country, there will be a lot of activity going forward. I do want to open this up to questions, but I just want to pose to the panel a couple questions. First of all, there are two models when somebody gets an electoral mandate like this. One is sort of the Lyndon Johnson Roosevelt agenda, which is to go forward on 20 different fronts all at once. That indeed being more active creates power, and that you're going to be more successful if you attack on 5 or 6 fronts rather than just one. The alternative view is you need to prioritize. You need to choose 1, 2, 3 issues and go with those so as not to dissipate your capital on those. Which do you think is more likely as a prediction of what President-elect Obama will do when he assumes office?
He's going to reframe everything he wants to do as benefiting the economy. So it'll look as if the focus is on the economy, but the proposals will in fact be separable from the economy where we're not in bad financial times. So he's going to justify infrastructure building on the grounds that that's the right way to create a stimulus. He's going to justify clean energy investment on the grounds that that's the way to create a clean energy economy and create clean energy jobs. The question is, how does he get his health care reform? Because there he's got very large costs, and I don't think he's going to retrieve the revenue he was planning to get from upper income earners very quickly because of the recession. And as a result, that may be postponed, and we may get simply an S-chip push. But now that Congress will be on the same page as the president.
I agree with Kathleen, just to follow up on that. I mean, I think that they've signaled that they're going to do a lot of things. I mean, they've signaled several times. And one of the things that's fascinating to me about this White Office of Urban Policy is they really have talked about it a bunch in the last couple of weeks. They didn't have to. Right? It wasn't like lots of people were asking, what are you going to do about this House Office of Urban Policy? They're signaling that they're going to do a lot of things. On the healthcare issue, my sense is that what they're going to do is they are going to try to push a comprehensive bill, even if they don't fund it for a couple of years. So that they are even going to push for pretty quickly on that. But in actually, implementing it might take a few years longer.
How do you read the appointments that we've seen being floated so far? What does that tell you about the likely direction of the Obama administration?
Well, on the financial side, I've been very pleased because he seems to have some people that do not come from an investment banking background, but come from a more macro economic background. And I think substituting a coherent, permanent system for providing liquidity by the government in lieu of this hodgepodge sort of approach, shooting from the hip here and there as things surface, is a likely outcome of getting those kind of people involved. I think we're going to see the New York Fed morphed into an overarching liquidity supplier.
Well, at this point, the only legal appointment is Eric Holder. And pardon?
And Greg Craig.
And Greg Craig. And both of them are very effective lawyers, very thoughtful lawyers, progressive lawyers, also not card-carrying civil libertarians. My guess is that if the administration is going to aspire to regain America's moral stature, it will come from President Obama making clear that those are his priorities. If those are his priorities, these guys will carry them out. We'll see whether he's willing actually to spend political capital to go in that direction.
I think it's also the case that the president-elect really has to be speaking to a number of different audiences and responding to a number of different narratives in making his decisions about major appointments. And one of the sort of narratives that came to define this campaign, to an extent, and this is sort of always true, I guess, of elections, to an extent that was sort of far outside of any, I think, reasonable sort of cold and sober assessment, was that there was a choice between experience and change, and that there was a choice between somebody who was sort of part of an apparatus that would be ready to lead on day one and somebody who was coming in from the outside and bringing new ideas. And this was true both in the primary season in the contest between Senators Obama and Clinton, and then during the general election. And as much as I think that dichotomy was vastly overstated in both phases of the campaign, I think it is true that a lot of the people whom the administration is going to need to be working with effectively, both in Congress and in the private sector, were waiting to see how the appointments would sort of play into and respond to those narratives. And I'm very pleased with many of the major appointments, and what I think President-elect Obama has done very skillfully is to select people for key roles. In addition to Eric Holder and Greg Craig, I would mention Melody Barnes, who is one of the smartest people in Washington, D.C., an extraordinary voice for progressive values, and a very familiar fixture in a certain kind of established Washington policy discussion. She was the chief counsel for Senator Kenneth on the Judiciary Committee for, I believe, 10 years. People who strike a certain balance between being known quantities, being well situated to sort of pick up the reins, in the mode that's been sort of on hold for the last 8 years, and yet also people who are more at least open to and committed to a set of progressive values than might otherwise have been the case. And I think I think that he chose these people because he thinks that they're the best people for the jobs. I think that they're also very strategically smart choices as well as very qualified people.
Seth, just a comment. As our colleague would say, Jeff Hazard would say, you got your two progressive lawyers. You need to learn to take yes for an answer.
This is, as I say, a good news, bad news story. If the choice is these guys or their predecessors, I have no doubt.
I have to say, Seth served a term as associate dean for me, and I remember he's wincing now as I'm about to quote him, but he said it would be very difficult for him to serve in an administration because he was always used to suing the administration. So it was a wonderful 2 years when Seth couldn't sue me. So.
Yeah, regardless of what you think of the individuals, the process of this transition is impressive. What it suggests is a capacity to manage complexity. That is admirable. And the comparison between this and the Clinton transition is a comparison between ineptness and high-quality management. And to the extent that the Clinton administration foundered over its management incapacities, and this administration is being forecast out of an administrative structure that is MBA-like. There is an irony. You've got a lawyer who's acting like the best of MBAs following an MBA whose degree probably should be taken away by Harvard.
I just want to ask a follow-up question. It's a leading question since I've heard Kathleen speak about this before. But could you just comment on the selection of Senator Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, whether you expected that, and secondly, whether or not you think it was a smart decision?
I didn't expect it, and I think it's a brilliant decision. It takes her off the electoral cycle in 4 years. If he fails to get out of Iraq and fails to win in Afghanistan, she's responsible and as a result can't critique him. And as a result, he's taken a major opponent out of electoral play in 4 years. At the same time, she can't play a major role in health care given the current set of folks at play in the Senate. And as a result has an option that she would have exercised otherwise foreclosed for her. So it works for her, it works for him, it's win-win. It's very, very smart. And I think she's going to do a good job.
I must say, one of the criticisms made of Senator Obama when he was running the campaign was that he didn't select her as vice president because he didn't have experience and he didn't want people around him who had substantially more experience. Well, when you look at his cabinet, you can see that comment had no place whatsoever.
Well, and let me also just say, I mean, Joe Biden is not a vice president for the faint of heart. I mean, in addition to being one of the longest serving and one of the most distinguished and accomplished foreign policy voices in the United States Senate, he is a man who speaks his mind freely and aggressively, and I think that it is...
And again.
Well, and no, I mean...
And who has strong opinions.
That's very strong, and I think that what the president-elect, one of the many things that he valued in Joe Biden, and obviously was not in the councils of selecting this man at all, but I think one of the things that he valued in him was precisely that he could count upon him to not simply be a sort of adjunct to Barack's existing views about foreign policy, but rather to aggressively place new ideas before him when he thinks he needs to hear them. And I thought it was a very, very strong governance choice at the time, and one that was, I thought, identifiably not sort of strategically about the election, but was much more about what kind of partner he would be in governance.
Let me put you on the hot seat. What do you think President Obama will do about Don't Ask, Don't Tell?
If you look on the HRC website, no. This is a serious answer. If you look on the HRC website, you will find a series of statements that the candidates made in November of last year on the 14th anniversary of the enactment of the policy. In response to an invitation to say, what steps will you take to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell? And surprise, surprise, none of the Republicans answered the question. Most of the Democrats answered the question. And the only person to actually answer the question was then Senator Obama. And everybody else kind of talked about Don't Ask, Don't Tell is really bad and we should get rid of it. And Obama actually answered the question. And what he said was, here is why this policy was a failure to begin with. And what we need to do in order to repeal this policy is to bring all the stakeholders to the table. We need to make the military partners in determining not just how best to repeal this policy, but how to replace it with a policy of non-discrimination and protocols for dealing with harassment and protocols for dealing with questions of, for example, reaccession of military members who have been discharged. We need to have the members of the House and Senate Armed Services Committee part of this process. We need to bring the Pentagon, which is a very different stakeholder from the military, to the table as part of this process, and we need to bring the advocates to the process. And all of those people need to be invested in the process of explaining not only how we're going to get rid of this policy, but what we're going to implement in its place. And that answer had a dramatic impact upon the people who actually know this issue, because, first of all, it was revelatory of an understanding of the different stakeholders. And it was very reassuring to people who deal with this policy sort of sympathetically, that is to say they want to get rid of it, in the DoD and in the military, who, for whom being a part of that process of repeal and of replacement with a policy of equality is one of their highest priorities. And so it was, at a very early stage, I think, a very smart and sophisticated way of responding to the question. As far as timing is concerned, one of the unfortunate problems of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy is it's a federal statute and it needs to be repealed by federal legislation. And so the timing question is in part going to be dictated by Congress's willingness to take the issue up. I don't know the answer to the timing question. My guess is then Senator Obama has said in interviews that he thinks it's something that can be accomplished within the first couple of years of an administration. And I think that part of that question will be dictated by how willing Congress is to take it up. And we had a very successful hearing on the Military Readiness Enhancement Act in the House earlier this year, in which the entire dialogue was different from what it had been 13 years ago. So I'm quite optimistic that it will happen, not obviously right away, but within the first term and perhaps within the first couple of years.
Thank you. Some questions from the audience?
Wow, thank you for the discussion. I've really enjoyed everything I've heard. I would just say one thing, and also Hillary brings Bill out to these other lands, countries, whatever, and Bill, is a fantastic speaker and congenial and a great statesman and everything. So for Hillary to bring him, I think that's why Hillary will probably be the selection, unless she's already been selected. I don't know for sure. My question is about the abortion issue. Just real brief. I think most people think it's wrong in general. I can't read Barack Obama's mind. I don't know how he's feeling about that. I know he sort of backed off a little bit on his anti-war status, which is probably a good thing. He backed off a little bit on that. And I think in his heart, most people think abortion is wrong. I mean, what can really be done with it? I mean, it's a necessary evil in this society. I mean, if we didn't have legal abortions, we'd have the illegal abortions, and it would be real sick situation. It's kind of like the Don't Ask, Don't Tell thing, where maybe at the time we needed that, and in this current day and age, maybe we can change the laws to non-discrimination. But can anyone comment about the abortion issue? Like, I mean, overall, what is Barack's leanings? Is it possible anything can happen along those lines? Wade broke.
The question is his views on abortion and what might be changes in the policy of the administration on abortion issues.
So I'll take a first pass at that. I should say, Wendell and I, this may be sort of implicit in our appearance here, but I suppose I should make it clear, neither one of us is speaking on behalf of the President-elect or the transition right now. We're speaking in our own capacities. President-elect Obama is very, very strongly pro-choice. He has been very strongly pro-choice for his entire professional career. He has a 100% rating from Planned Parenthood. He has fought for a woman's right to choose, first in the Illinois State Senate and then the United States Senate. And so I think what we will see from this administration is very clear, which is a very strong commitment to pro-choice policies, which include not just the availability of abortion when a woman chooses to pursue an abortion, but also smart family planning policies, which give women control over their bodies and over their lives and over their sexuality in a whole range of ways, and which both reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies that happen in the first place and that empower women to make choices to have control over their lives. And that ranges from issues of abstinence-only sex education, which are enormous, demonstrable failures, and which then Senator Obama has spoken out against very courageously, to taking a much broader view about the issue of domestic violence and violence against women, which of course has a very powerful nexus to issues of control over one's body and one's sexuality, and recognizing that reproductive choice is not just an issue about a medical procedure. It's a question about empowering women in both economically, socially, sort of in their safety, and in the personal choices that they make. This is a set of issues that the president-elect understands and cares about a great deal. So I think that the answer of what we're going to see is pretty clear.
Questions? Yes.
Thank you so much. Just something else really very interesting. My question is about national service. Senator Obama has spoken a lot about expanding AmeriCorps from currently about 75,000 people a year to about 250,000 people. He's talked about a new generation of Americans stepping up to serve. I guess I think maybe Kathleen and Wendell could speak to this. I could throw it out to anyone how you think he'll communicate that, get people, what he'll do to get people doing that, and how will that be implemented practically? Will it be implemented?
I think that probably the initial approach is going to be connecting this to funding for education, loans for education, grants for education, which has both been a big issue for the Senator President-elect during the campaign, and is also a gigantic issue in the country in general now because of the situation of the economy and how difficult it is for many students to get loans. So we're going to have to, by necessity, rethink that process. It was even on the radio this morning that the current administration is trying to expand opportunities for student loans. So I think that the way to focus on youth engagement is going to be through the Pell Grants and the student loan process. And so my guess, and it really is just a guess, and Tobias is right, we're not speaking for the administration. My guess is that what you're going to see next year is a necessary revamping of the whole way we finance secondary education. And then way we finance students go to college and graduate school, and therefore, and in that way, there will be options. So, for example, one of the things he proposes, if you commit to do service for 2, 3, 5 years, then your loan will be a grant, or you would get some support in paying back your loan, those kinds of things. So I think that's the way he's going to do it, and it does provide a gigantic opportunity, I think, to really expand that kind of program.
Mike, I should just mention, along what Wendell said, that in addition to the $600 billion announced this morning to buy mortgage-related securities from Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and Ginnie Mae, there's another $200 million to buy securitized billion to buy securitized securities secured by car loans, student loans, and the like. New issues.
Professor Kreimer, you had mentioned in your remarks about.
Could you speak up?
You had mentioned in your remarks about the Guantanamo detainees that the administration should do the right thing. Correctly. I'm wondering if you could detail what that means exactly in light of the fact that some of these detainees have been there for 8 years. Releasing them into the United States, they're probably not too happy with the United States. But also, if we send them to other countries, there's evidence of former detainees being transferred to countries with torture, and a lot of countries just won't take them. So what do we do with them in the process?
Well, in my view, those who are plausibly subject to criminal prosecution should be moved to the United States and prosecuted criminally. Those who are not subject to criminal prosecution should be released in some fashion. Now, in what fashion? My hope would be that President-elect Obama, as part of his effort to regain America's moral stature, will find support around the world of some countries that will not torture these detainees and will take them, and some should be released into the United States. We provide asylum to people who are subject to torture in other countries in other circumstances. And in my view, if there are innocent people who we've held for 8 years who will be subject to torture if they are returned to their country, we should provide them with asylum as well.
I'm surprised in a panel of law professors to hear nothing about judicial appointments. Is there one big idea about how the Obama administration can define judges, and is there one big idea about legislative strategy about how to avoid having these appointments held up, considering that no supermajority was achieved?
Yet.
The question is, I presume, what the overall philosophy would be of President Obama in terms of making nominations, and obviously any inside baseball suggestions is who might be on the front of the list, and then secondly, is there a way or strategy of overcoming what many see as a stalemate in reaching agreement on judicial nomination?
I think there are probably 3 or 4 on this panel, and I'm not one of them.
And I'm not one of them either.
There's no requirement that the Supreme Court justice be a member of the bar.
Let me set the terms of the discussion with, again, a good news, bad news strategy, and leave it, and then leave it to my more politically knowledgeable colleagues to talk about how the strategy is accomplished. Going into this election, you had a Supreme Court that divided 5-4 on an extraordinary number of cases. On environmental cases, on abortion cases, on gun rights cases, on cases involving Guantanamo, and cases involving affirmative action. Across the board, there's a 5-4 split, with, roughly speaking, 4 hardcore conservatives, 4 people who are these days characterized as liberal, probably would in the old days be characterized as moderate, and Justice Anthony Kennedy. The probability that the next president will appoint at least one justice is high. If it had been a Republican, the chances that you would have one more hardcore right-wing justice added to the majority would be substantial. The good news is that won't happen. The bad news is that the oldest justices at this point are Justices Stevens, Ginsburg, and Kennedy. A replacement of any of those, except perhaps Justice Kennedy with a strong progressive justice, will not change the balance of power. So what is a president going to do? What my guess is, whatever opportunity for Supreme Court appointment comes up, the president will seek to appoint somebody who is a thoughtful person who embodies the ideals that the president has claimed upon election. Can the president get such a person through the Senate? I defer to my politically knowledgeable colleagues.
Well, so just to build on what Seth says, I think the answer to your specific question is that the president-elect is going to take the same approach to judicial nominees as he's taken to the appointments that he's made so far. And if you look at that approach, I think that he'll be pretty successful in the judicial nominees too. I think the bigger question that you begin framing your remarks is really, what is going to be the role of the judicial system in a lot of the issues that we're talking about? And I think that's a really fascinating question that I'm really not clear about, right? I mean, we seem to have reached an equilibrium, for better or worse, on a bunch of the issues that we've been struggling with the court for the last 20 years, right? Abortion and those kind of issues, affirmative action. I don't see those as being big issues in the next decade. The question is, what are going to be the big issues? And obviously, the answer to that question is going to shape the debates about judicial nominees. And since I'm not exactly clear what those issues are going to be, I mean, we have a couple of them, right? So it's going to be hard to say what the debates will be. It will be hard to craft a strategy, I think.
This is one of the few occasions when I will disagree with my friend and colleague Wendell. I actually think that the last 15 years have been characterized by dramatic shifts rather than by equilibrium. I mean, we have seen retrenchment on reproductive rights at the Supreme Court. We have seen, overwhelming, dramatic shift in notions of federalism and the powers of the federal government and the sovereign prerogatives of the states, which are still shifting. In the issue of LGBT equality, we've had two landmark, but in practical terms, relatively modest opinions saying that you cannot throw gay people in jail and you cannot define gay people entirely outside of the Equal Protection Clause. These are salutary results. In both instances, we were waiting somewhat trepidatiously to see whether the court would in fact say that you could define gay people outside of the Equal Protection Clause or throw us in jail, and those would have been bad outcomes. But there are a whole host of issues relating to so-called associational rights under the First Amendment, and when gay people can enjoy the benefits of anti-discrimination laws against resistant private entities. There was a case that was decided in the Federal Circuit the other day, I believe it was actually on Election Day, relating to the application of certain kinds of race-conscious affirmative action programs in government contracting programs. In some sense, the sort of next step from the Adirondack decision, for those of you who've had constitutional law, which was a very bad decision, and the Supreme Court is going to have to decide whether to take it. So actually, I think that I wish it were the case that we had reached a sort of acceptable equilibrium on these issues, and the question, the story was what comes next. But in fact, I think that there's a whole lot that the upcoming court is going to have to address with these familiar issues.
Let me add.
You didn't. One point, just want to clarify. I said for better or worse. I don't think it's a good equilibrium that we're at. That wasn't the point that I was making. The point that I was making is that I think that on a lot of these issues, and I think that gay rights is the exception, on a lot of the other issues, we seem to be running out of steam on them, and that I don't see major changes.
Let me add three other pieces to the mix.
Could we just make it two?
Okay. One, the Second Amendment, which is going to be a fruitful source of litigation. Supreme Court 5-4, the Supreme Court has just discovered that the Second Amendment provides enforceable rights. Two, campaign finance, which is up for grabs again. And three, sorry, Mike, the issue of rights of undocumented residents of the United States, which is on its way up to the Supreme Court in a series of ways and represents a tremendous challenge for the legal system of the country.
I was going to add something, but it's not my role. Yeah, Marcia.
This is another Guantanamo question. Omar Khadr, who was taken into U.S. custody at age 15 in Afghanistan, has been held at Guantanamo ever since 2002. Is actually scheduled to go to trial January 26th before the Military Commission. He will be the first child soldier tried in the United States in our history. Does anybody on the panel have any insights into what the Obama administration might do with a trial that is set to begin 6 days after his inauguration?
I wasn't part of the campaign team.
I mean, I'll give you a simple short answer, which is no. That is to say, this is not an issue that was in my purview when I was advising the campaign. But look, I mean, the president-elect has been very courageous during the campaign as well as following the election in saying that the course that was followed by the Bush administration was reprehensible in many respects, and the United States has work to do in regaining our moral stature in the world, and that means implementing some very immediate changes, including immediately turning to the question of dismantling Guantanamo. So I don't know the answer. I won't pretend to have insight into the answer of what interruption of that trial might be possible or might be on the agenda, but it is not an issue that this president will shy away from addressing simply because it's difficult and immediate.
We are taking one last question because we're actually behind time. Yeah.
Do you think a re-examination of our criminal priorities is on the table in light of their high cost and the economic crisis that's currently with them?
I think it's a really good question, and I think that that's something that has been percolating up from local governments to states, and it's something that the federal government's going to have to deal with. I think it's kind of fascinating that it wasn't really addressed very much during the campaign. So I think that my answer to the question is I think that you will see some experimental initiatives at the federal level on prisoner reentry and things like that. But we need, to the point of your question, is we need a rethinking of our criminal justice system. And I don't see that, even though we're already in a crisis, I don't see the attention at the federal level coming yet. But that might be the kind of thing, we can sit here and talk about what we think is going to happen, and obviously events take their own course. The state of California right now is going bankrupt in large part because of its criminal justice system. So it's something that's going to become an issue. It already is an issue, and the federal government is going to have to face it, whether or not it's really giving it much attention right now.
I want to thank everybody. This has really been an extraordinary panel. I want to also... Kathleen, Chuck, Wendell, Seth, Tobias, really I think we've all learned a lot about what's going to happen. I should note that we've taped this. We're all going to return here 2 years from now, and everybody's going to answer for every single prediction that they made. Anyway, thank you all. That was great. Thank you.